When the last person clocks out and the streets go empty and silence takes over, that's when the real job begins. Because when the world goes to sleep, another one wakes up. And these security guard entries prove that sometimes the hardest part of the job is convincing yourself that what you think you saw wasn't really there. The year was 2004. I was 19 and fresh out of college. I took a job as a security guard until I could make it into the RCMP. My first and only posting was at the closed correctional center in Yarmouth, Nova Scotia. I didn't know much about the place, and I still don't, but I'll tell you a story about my experiences there. I was given the night shifts. I would show up at 7:45 just as it was getting dark. The lady that I relieved welcomed me in, and the first thing that she says, "Do you know the names of the people who died here?" Maybe not the best opening line to someone's first day on the job. All I could muster up was, "No." She insisted that I never look them up, but then proceeded to tell me about the man that hung himself on the 3rd floor, and a woman that killed herself on the 2nd, and a guy was killed in his cell on the 1st. That kind of stuff never really bothered me though. I'd experienced some hauntings before in a house I lived in when I was 12, but I debunked all of them, so I've been a skeptic ever since. But that's besides the point. Back to the lady. She finished by telling me I was supposed to do rounds of the correctional center every hour to make sure that no one had snuck in, and then she left. So, there I sat at a desk watching the X-Files on my laptop for the 3rd time in its entirety. Just as I was settling in to what most people would find an unsettling environment, I heard what sounded like someone stomping down the stairs in work boots just on the other side of the office wall. I poked my head out the door and saw nothing. I sat back down and the footsteps stopped, pipes creaking or the building settling, trying to rationalize it away, I thought, most likely. About an hour later, or one episode of the X-Files, I heard the footsteps again. This time, I sat and listened. I counted 1, 2, 3, all the way up to 12. They got so close to my door, I had expected to see someone walking through the entryway, but then they just stopped. I sat there trying to figure out how I could rationalize this one away, and I came up with rats. Yeah, rats, for sure. Then I heard water running in the bathroom. It was just out in the open right by the cells, and I had a straight line to it, but I didn't see anyone in there. And just as I convinced myself to get up and go check it out, it stopped. So, doing what I do best, I shrugged it off and kept watching the X-Files. By now it was close to 10 p.m. and I still hadn't done a single round. Because no one was coming into the building, it was basically a fort. We were fine. Then I heard the footsteps again. 1, 2, 3, and so on until 12, and then again, they stopped. I went around the corner wondering why it always stopped at 12, channeling my inner Scully and having the bright idea to count the stairs. There were 13. Interesting. I went back and sat down. Time went on, episodes passed. I still hadn't done a round, but I had to go to the bathroom. I went into the stall, did my business, and before I could reach up to pull the chain to flush, the toilet flushed beneath me. And this is an old building, no automatic toilets here. I pulled up my pants, went to the sink, and before I could turn the tap, the cold water handle slowly turned on its own. Water started rushing out. Still in detective mode, I came to the conclusion that there must have been pressure behind the taps. So, I washed my hands, and as I was drying them, the tap turned itself off. There's no way I could logic my way out of this one, but I still had a long shift to go, so I tried not to think about it and just tried to convince myself that it was the building being old. The rest of the night was more of the same. Footsteps coming down the stairs, always stopping at 12. I came back for night 2, same thing. Footsteps, water running, toilets flushing, but there was something new. I was wearing the same Caterpillar steel-toed shoes that I wore in college. They had these thick, waxed laces that I had double knotted from day one. They were basically fused together, so I could just slip them on and off easily. So, I was sitting there at this old desk, legs extended and crossed underneath, watching the X-Files again. Eventually, nature called and I had to go to the washroom. When I rolled the chair back and brought my feet out, the laces were untied, placed perfectly on either side of my shoes. Very good then, I thought. I continued to work at the correctional center, still strictly night shifts, for the next 3 or 4 months. Night after night, I experienced the same things. The 12 clunks coming down the stairs. the taps turning on and off, the toilets flushing, but that was the only time my boots ever got untied. I never did look up the names of the people who died there, and I never did a single round of that building. I used to work overnights as a security guard in an office complex. It wasn't a bad gig, quiet most nights, just me doing rounds and watching the feeds on the security cameras. We had cameras covering the main lobby, every hallway, the loading dock, and the parking lot. The parking lot camera was angled just enough that you could see where the back entrance to the building was, but not the door itself. One night, the motion alert went off on my monitor. That wasn't too unusual during the day, but after midnight, it definitely got my attention. I switched to the parking lot feed and saw a man walking towards the back of the building. For a second, my heart jumped. I was trying to remember if I had locked everything down properly, or if this guy was about to try to break in. I watched the feed, waiting for him to come into view again, but after that moment, nothing. He never reappeared on any camera, and the back door never opened. I decided to go check it out. Everything was locked, just like I left it. I walked the perimeter, checked the windows, no sign of anyone. The lot was empty. When I got back inside, I couldn't shake the feeling, so I pulled up the camera footage to see if I could figure out where the guy went. But I couldn't find anything. Just a few frames of him walking toward the door and then gone, like he'd vanished mid-step. I froze the footage on the clearest frame I could get. My stomach dropped. The guy was wearing my uniform, same jacket, same hat, same boots, even the same build and height. I couldn't make out his face clearly, but everything else matched perfectly. It looked exactly like me walking up to the back door and then disappearing. Or at least that's what it looked like. I'm sure it was just some random person or a trick of the cameras, but to this day I can't explain where he went after that. A lot of strange stuff happened on those overnight shifts, but this one still messes with me the most. I've worked security on and off for several years to supplement my income, so not only do I have my own fair share of creepy stories, but I've heard plenty from coworkers as well. Probably the most legitimately scary story I've heard was from a guard that was working in a closed down area. The building itself is more than 100 years old, but hasn't been used since the early 2000s. The city is keeping up with basic maintenance as it waits for a buyer. There's usually only one guard assigned to the building. It's a 6,000-seat arena with a huge basement and 2 additional floors that have lots of old office spaces, dressing rooms, and separate, smaller community theater type stages upstairs. The usual guard is doing his rounds through the building. The building itself is very interesting as it's largely unchanged since the heydays of the 70s and 80s. The upper floors are largely dark and are pretty creepy. Anyway, the guard is doing his normal rounds, but feels unnaturally creeped out. It's his normal post, something he's done dozens of times, but something just feels different on this day. He's feeling pretty jumpy, but shakes it off and continues. He's a very diligent guy who walks every floor of the building. He's in the very top of the catwalk system above the main arena where the old spotlighting equipment was. It's a narrow wooden catwalk system. Suddenly, he hears a loud creak behind him, like someone is walking. He spins around and sees a guy standing there. The guy is frozen mid-stride like he had been tiptoeing up behind him. The guy has an unsettling, mischievous-looking smile on his face, like he's been caught with his hand in the cookie jar. Dude has a big steel pipe in his hand instead of a cookie though. The guard pulls his gun and this guy just takes off sprinting in the opposite direction and disappears into the labyrinth of the building. Cops come and do a sweep of the building with a canine but don't find him. They do find that he's been playing in the dust that's on top of the old concession counters. He had written a bunch of bizarre helter-skelter type unsettling rhymes and drew a bunch of stick figures hanging from nooses. The speculation is that some crazy homeless guy had been hiding in the building for a few days and made a game of following the guards without them knowing it. The guard, saw the writing on the counters was still there the last time he was there.